Today I'm also speaking on the Mineral Resources Amendment Bill 2023, and as others have said, this bill is a shake-up in the way that mines are approved and regulated in Victoria. And look, I've been listening to the contributions from other members, and it is true that the way that mines are approved and regulated in Victoria now is not working. That's clear. The process is confusing, it's opaque. Many communities who live near quarries and mines especially suffer from this. The environment also suffers from this. Personally, I've worked with many local communities across the state over the last 10 years who've really had to fight tooth and nail to stop bad mining proposals from going ahead, something that hasn't been talked about a whole lot in the chamber in this debate. These are proposals that would have poisoned local communities and rivers, decimated biodiversity and severely affected the people who live near them. Sometimes it's a years or decade-long fight from local communities who are vindicated in the end often when an environmental effects statement or similarly determines that the mine is not a good use of that area, but communities in the meantime have to go through so much. And many communities who are living next to mines have mines that don't take their responsibilities seriously enough, and that has a real impact on people's daily lives. So we could have taken an opportunity to fix some of this, but the government has put forward a bill that we fear could make things even worse, and we fear it has been designed in a way to make it simply easier to get mines approved in Victoria. Mining companies so far seem quite happy with the bill, but locally affected communities, councils and environment groups are all raising serious concerns with it. So I think it's important to, when all of those groups are raising serious concerns about a bill, that we do look at some of those concerns. So I'd like to detail some of those today. So firstly, the bill would remove a crucial requirement for mining companies to lodge work plans with the Earth Resources Regulator. And to be honest, when I first looked at this change, I thought this looks like something that is written and designed by the Minerals Council to make mining easier. And I've heard some of the contributions from Labor MPs today saying that getting a mine approved is time consuming, it's costly, there's too much red tape, we're increasing costs for operators, which to me sounds a little bit like some talking points from the mining industry. But let's look at what work plans are, the thing that the government will be removing. So work plans cover details like community engagement plan, elimination or mitigation of risks, particularly for work that might impact the environment, groundwater, the community, the land, property or infrastructure, and also plans for rehabilitation. So this bill replaces work plans with a duty for mining companies to self-assess and then minimise risks to the environment and people. So akin to perhaps the general duty under the Environment Protection Act. I heard the previous Labor speaker say that work plans contain crucial details for certain things in the mining plan, but now we're removing them. So look, work plans, they do offer this singular first step in ensuring transparency and public reporting for local communities. They create some level of environmental oversight and general compliance. Now, they're not perfect, and we know that things are perhaps not working as well as they could, but I don't think that just removing work plans is necessarily the right answer. Mining licences are not publicly available documents. So this means that work plans are the only things detailing mining and quarrying projects that communities can access. So yes, they have to pay a $30 fee, and yes, they're often not as transparent as they could be, but without them, we don't really have anything. And so otherwise, communities would have to go through kind of a long and expensive and often fruitless freedom of information requests. So there's nothing really in these amendments that gives us confidence that companies will have to provide an equivalent publicly available details in another format, save for perhaps a watered down requirement, perhaps for a rehabilitation plan, which I think has some issues as well. So we've heard in the Minister's second reading speech, we've read that some industries, they have complaints over the current approvals process. So that basically seeking statutory endorsement of a work plan before planning approval led to unnecessary cost and delay in the approvals process for mining companies. But maybe, we could have reordered the process. We we could have done things differently rather than scrapping the work plan entirely. Potentially, what might be worse for communities is what it means for work plan variations, which are currently required for any operator who suddenly decides to expand their mine, for example. Under this bill, it seems that all they would have to do is notify the department head, and if, say, a mining company wants to double, triple, quadruple the size of their project, it's not clear how the community would find out about that. So not only does this remove some level of transparency and a review avenue for communities who might not want to see mine expansions, but potentially it removes their shot at the only mechanism we have for an actual environmental investigation, a referral for an environmental effects statement. Because unless the Minister calls for one, the decision to request an EES will remain the decision of local councils, who are already, as we know, quite under-resourced, but will now be saddled with this additional job of deciding whether or not to approve mines in their local communities. So this brings us to a second concern that many groups are raising with us with the bill, which is around, because without the requirement for a work plan, the first and only step in the approvals process becomes planning permission. And this places the first decision regarding mining and exploration activities on local government and the planning department, rather than the groups with the geological and environmental expertise, the resources department and the ERR. Objections will still come to councils and the planning minister will remain a referral authority, but neither the community nor council will have the benefit of an ERR-endorsed work plan to assess a project's level of risk, the adequacy and honesty of a company's mitigation efforts, or the long-term costs and benefits of a proposal. So even Minter Ellison has come out and admitted that this has the potential to shift a greater burden onto the planning regime to effectively assess, approve and regulate mining and extractive industries in Victoria. So what information will councils now make their decision on beyond a mining company's self-assessed risk plan? Well, that's unknown. Whatever they get, they will effectively have to assess themselves without department or regulator staff and expertise. And I think this goes to the crux of what are some of the problems with this bill, is that we're saying that having to do all that work in a work plan first before going for approval is too much red tape and too much effort and too much cost for mining companies. But instead what we're getting is a mining company self-assesses whether they're a low risk or a high risk operation, send that to councils and councils have to decide. But what information do they have to make that decision? Very little information. They don't necessarily have the expertise. They don't have the benefit of a work plan that's been endorsed by the Earth Resources, the ERR, to even look at and say, okay, how do we even make this decision? So I think there's some problems there, and it's probably designed that way so that councils are more likely to approve mines than not. I don't know if many councils can bring together dedicated teams of ecologists, hydrologists, geologists, First Nations historians, other environmental scientists that would be required to really properly assess mining applications, and certainly I don't think they can do that in a rate-capped environment. So Labor is essentially asking councils now to assume the role of a state regulatory body. Will they be given any more resources to do this? In our briefings, there's been no indication that that's the case, so probably the answer is no. Councils also do not have the same powers as a regulator or state department. I've had former councillors contact my office directly to remind us of the specific deficiencies with the Victorian planning provisions, namely that they're not prescriptive and do not cover certain mining impacts. So these include radiation from mineral sands mining, compliance with the Commonwealth Critical Minerals Strategy and its national security issues, consideration of the EPBC Conservation Act, matters of national environmental significance, water security, and more. Recently, Ballarat City Council, in fact, refused to request an EES statement for the Ballarat Gold Mines new tailings dam. They simply rubber stamped the permit, although a VCAT appeal has now been lodged. So under this bill, Ballarat could be more or less alone in now monitoring that dam's ongoing self-assessed risks to the community and the environment. So how will councils, how will they do any of this? How will they obtain the technical expertise on mining operations, on environmental hazards, the monitoring required to enforce regulatory compliance with the nebulous new duty, the ability to assess ongoing public health impacts of mining? We haven't really been told how councils will be able to do all of this. Will they get new financial resources? Will they get new human resources? Who knows? So as I mentioned, planning decisions are reviewable at VCAT, but this again seems counterintuitive because without a work plan, how can councils and communities know how to challenge a project based on environmental or community impacts? So what we've been told in the briefings that we've had, which we've engaged in good faith with the Department and the Minister's Office, is that a lot of these details will be in the regulations and the codes of compliance. But they aren't to come until several years after this legislation passed. So we're essentially being told to trust the government and everything will be in the regulations, don't worry about it. But I have to say that's probably not enough detail, particularly for communities who will be impacted by these mines. It doesn't give the community a lot of confidence that it will improve things. And in fact, many communities are really worried that it might make things worse and might make things a lot easier for mining companies to run over the top of communities. Not that all mining companies do that, but I have seen enough examples of that in my work here over the last 9 or so years to know that that is a very real risk and one that the government should take seriously. So the third concern that's being brought to us is around, under these amendments, a work plan endorsed by and created with interagency consultation is replaced by a new self-assessment of risk prepared by the mining company, the operator. So essentially mining companies, now what they will get to do is they get to self-assess how much risk their mine poses to the environment and to the community, and then decide for themselves how they will manage those risks. So for anyone here who trusts mining companies to self-regulate, I would just remind you to perhaps look at what Rio Tinto did in Juukan Gorge over in WA Labor's Petro State. There are countless more examples where self-assessment has not been, or self-management, self-regulation has not been particularly successful. Now, if a particularly honest company admits that their project is high or medium risk, they will be forced to do one small element of the existing arrangement, a rehabilitation plan, and undertake some level of reporting. If a proponent goes for the cheapest option and opts for low risk, and hey, you know, when have mining companies ever publicly underestimated the impacts to boost their bottom line? The proponent can commence work according to this code of compliance, but as I said, what's in the code of compliance, we don't know. We're told this will come later after the bill's passed. Now, the self-assessed risk plans, what the government's telling us is that they will theoretically be kept in check with a new duty that mining companies will have to minimise their risks to the environment. Now, ordinarily we would welcome a new environmental duty. We did so in the EPA Act that we passed a number of years ago. But without a reformed and funded regulator or substantial fees and penalties for non-compliance, we're worried that there's nothing to suggest this new duty would actually increase environmental protections. Instead, there is a fair bit to indicate that it could actually act as a fig leaf while companies continue to get away with damage to the environment. So there's nothing really here that allays our concerns and addresses VAGO's 2020 finding that the Earth Resources Regulator has nothing meaningful in place to set enforceable requirements to encourage mining operators to comply with their rehabilitation obligation. So the proposed fines for breaching it are very low, and mining is exempt from the need to obtain certain environmental approvals during the planning process, such as restrictions on clearing native vegetation and certain approvals under the Environment Protection Act. So the logic to these exemptions, we've been informed, was that ERR will ensure these requirements are effectively met in the work plan preparation and approval process. That was where the EPA and the Planning Minister are consulted. So that was the rationale, I guess, for having them exempt from some of these environment laws. But under this bill, if this bill passes, there is no requirement to do a work plan. So the rationale for exempting them from these environment laws doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. We also note that groups like Environmental Justice Australia and local communities have advocated for the mining sector in Victoria to integrate an environmental impacts assessment as part of the assessment of mining projects for years, but this bill doesn't take the opportunity to do that. So it seems that the reason this bill is being brought forward is twofold. Firstly, mining companies are finding it too confusing and difficult to get mines approved. They want it to be easier. Secondly, there's about to be a boom in mining for critical minerals, things especially needed to build renewable energy. Victoria isn't a huge mining state, but we do have some of these critical minerals. And I get that Victoria wants to cash in on that boom. I get that some of these minerals will absolutely be necessary. But if we are about to have a boom, and if we are about to have an increase in applications for mining these minerals, surely we need to have a regulatory system that is really robust to deal with that. Because it won't just be, one mine every few years. If we're about to see a boom, let's regulate it. And so deregulating it or allowing mining companies to self-assess and removing important parts of the process is really the last thing we should be doing. All of this means that my office has been contacted by a variety of organisations over the last month, quite a wide variety, who are really worried that they will have less transparency, and it will make things much easier for mining companies to go ahead, potentially at the expense of local communities. And there's a local group, Mine Free Glenalladale, out in Gippsland, who I've been to visit a few times, who have been fighting a mineral sands mine for a long time. It was a mine that really shouldn't have gone ahead and didn't in the end. They won their fight. But it took them a really long time and a lot of work to do that. And they've said to us, this bill is akin to giving the fox the keys to the hen house and then leaving the door wide open. Environmental Justice Australia says that Victorians deserve a chance to review the bill and decide whether they support the government stripping back oversight and transparency requirements for mining companies. But the public have only had 2 weeks. So given that and given the significant concerns, I hear a lot of the government's arguments. I hear that it is not working for anyone, the current system. I think, though, that given that the community hasn't had a lot of time to look at this and given the significant concerns that have been raised, it is prudent to delay and to go away and do further consultation and try and improve this bill. So therefore, given all that, I'd like to move a reasoned amendment. And I move that all the words after that be omitted and replaced with the words, "This House refuses to read this bill a second time until further consultation occurs with local governments, environmental organisations and regional communities likely to be impacted by mining and exploration." So we'd like to see much more consultation done with these groups and the broader public about what these changes really will mean. We'd also like to see some more detail about what will be in the codes of compliance and other regulations, so we're not just asked to trust that everything will be okay, because I think a lot of the devil will be in the detail. So it's for that reason we're moving the reasoned amendment, and we hope all those in the chamber will support that. I think more consultation, more than 2 weeks, is a good thing for our democracy. We hope that this reasoned amendment is supported. If not, we won't be able to support the bill in this House in its current form. Thank you.